Now, we are going to launch the Ubuntu declaration and call to action. Before we do this, we're going to play a video that highlights the key commitments, because you did say, Taina, that this has been a journey. Where did this journey begin? The commitments from Delhi, the outcome then of the second Men Engaged Global Symposium in 2014. And of course, it sets the stage and reflects how the world has changed and how we're moving along with this journey. So we're going to play that video in just a moment, but let me tell you what else is going to be happening. Delhi to Kigali video, and then I want to spend some time just talking to you about the making of the Ubuntu declaration, because it's so easy to just get clever people who are eloquent to put together some inspiring words. That's not how it happened. It's important for us to really appreciate the enormity of the moment, the significance of the declaration itself, but the process of developing the declaration. We're going to get that. And then I can't wait for a live reading of the Ubuntu declaration in all different languages, okay? And then we are going to get closing and our comments from our editorial group, a moment of recognition of our editorial group. And then I haven't forgotten Alejandro's question that will be answered at that time as well. So let's take a look at this video, Delhi to Kigali.
Hegemonic masculinity is behind everything which threatens the planet and threatens our solidarity.
We need to focus on understanding how the rhetoric, the social psyche of masculinity in this way.
To find the common cause, that our sisters who started this work would trust enough that men could come in and be part of the gender justice struggle.
Only way to do it would be to engage with political leadership and convince them that they need to change the law.
It's not only talking about political work and political awareness, it's about inner transformation.
Clearly, change is possible, and we should hold on to our optimism.
I wanted to act as if the house was on fire, because it is.
Wow, how powerful was that? We can learn from the youth, we can learn from everybody, acting as if the house is on fire, because it is. And the commitment, the passion, the renewal, really, because that's what this declaration today is about. It's about the renewal, going down memory lane, not just for the sake of it, but reminding ourselves of the founding values of the Ubuntu Symposium, but not just the values, but the urgency. Why? Why was there a need for the Ubuntu Symposium? We're reflecting on progress, but those conditions in many societies haven't changed. In fact, they have been compounded by all sorts of other intersectional crises that are gender specific, that are gender specific. So that's why this work continues to have meaning, and renewing our commitment to it. It seems like an apt way to close our ceremony. So let's do this. We are going to talk about the Ubuntu Declaration and the call to action. It is going to be read out loud, but before we do that, I just want to just a moment to share background of the declaration, the significance of the declaration. And I don't know if you can see the slide. If we have a slide, maybe that could help me speak to the moment. If not, we will have it later. But let me just start. So the Ubuntu Declaration and call to action aims to build upon the visions laid out at the second Men Engage Global Symposium in Delhi in 2014, as we've just seen in that video, and the first Men Engage Global Symposium in Rio in 2009. And each respective declaration articulated our evolving collective politics. Again, as the video told us, the daily declaration and call to action set a benchmark. So we want to measure ourselves against what we have set, and also relevant to Alejandro's question earlier. The daily declaration and call to action set a benchmark for members, partners, and broader fields following the long-standing lead of feminist movements of identifying patriarchy as part of the root of the problem analysis and affirming that transforming masculinities is part of the work to dismantle patriarchy. And within the Ubuntu Declaration and call to action, the attempt has been to expand, nuance, deepen, and strengthen our collective political work to transform patriarchal masculinities, to build on the conceptual framework laid out of the Ubuntu Symposium. We articulate through this declaration and call to action common directions, aspirations, and commitments which we can be held accountable for. These are joint efforts towards the realization of gender, social, economic, and environmental justice. So many of you use the word accountability when we talked about aspirations, when we talked about the future, accountability. Okay, so the next thing I want to share with you is the process of developing the declaration itself, because I think this is important so that you appreciate how deliberate the authors and the editors and those who made an input have been. So in order to develop the Ubuntu Declaration and call to action, there's a whole host of members and partners working around the clock for 3 months to finalize the document. 72 participants, how impressive is that? 6 regions plus 51 countries. Working group and editorial group, over 100 technical inputs, 13 drafting calls over 3 months. That's a lot of work. And wait for this, what you're going to hear or read today is not where it began, it's how it ended, because there were eight versions of the declaration. I kid you not. So again, we appreciate everyone's contribution towards this collective process. Now, we are going to have a live reading of the Ubuntu Declaration in different languages. We will hear it, the declaration itself, and the call to action read aloud by members of the Alliance across 5 languages. So please, again, I remind you, make sure you've selected your translation language of choice. And for other languages we'll be reading, please do check that the chat box where the English text will be shared during these portions. Okay, so the reading will start. And we're thanking everyone who was involved in developing this inspiring document. And we're thanking everyone, the editorial working group members who edited, who dedicated so many hours, so much time. And if we can please have you come on screen for a moment of celebration and where we can thank you and read this declaration. So please do come forward. Right now, the reading of the declaration will start and the recording will start at the same time as well.
We standing together, activists, thinkers, learners, doers, and change makers from all corners of the world have joined hands and voices at the third Men Engage Global Symposium, the Ubuntu Symposium. Over the course of 7 months, we have gathered for critical dialogues, collective reflection, for listening, learning, and defining joint actions to dismantle the oppressive power structures we face in the world today. We come together with a shared recognition that we are all deeply interconnected in a world of profound injustices that can no longer be hidden. We believe things must urgently change. We must end current patriarchal patterns of exploitation for people and planet, extractive economic models, and their many forms of control over bodies, land, and livelihoods, entrenched within political systems of privileges and power hierarchies.
What we see. On the one hand, we look at the world and see daunting challenges that can seem insurmountable. On the other hand, we see meaningful advancements in the struggle for gender equality and justice, including the establishment of global human rights treaties, the Sustainable Development Goals, increased, although insufficient, female leadership in parliaments, and the criminalization of violence against women. We also see resistance, hope, resilience, vision, and disruption from women-led and grassroots movements no longer willing to accept justice as the norm. We hear them raising their collective voices for transformation in politics, economies, cultures, and mindsets. And yet, despite progress made, violation to the fundamental, universal, and invisible human rights of women, girls, and people of diverse identities persist around the world.
As we gather, we witness the global COVID-19 pandemic that has laid bare the flaws of our care system and the unacceptable levels of inequality in access to care all over the world. We see the escalating levels of femicide and gender-based violence against women, girls, and individuals of diverse gender identities, the longest standing and unaddressed pandemic in humanity everywhere in the world. Normative expectations of masculinity continue to pressure men and raise boys to identify with violent behaviors as a legitimate form of power and to exercise power through bullying, harassment, and stigmatization of non-normative behaviors. We see the violence perpetrated by law enforcement, military forces, and authoritarian governments against their own citizens. We witness the increasing limitations for individuals and collective mobilization, protest, and freedom of assembly, as well as shrinking of civil society spaces for those committed to justice. And we see increased attacks on human and environmental rights defenders all over the world. We witness the rising tide of anti-democracy, ethno-nationalism, white supremacy, and masculinist movements. We witness a global surge in repressive authoritarian governments and well-funded anti-rights movements, which have increased their attacks on gender equality, women's rights, and the rights of LGBTQI people, particularly those most marginalized. We see the continued expansion of an economic model shaped by the whims of corporate interests and built upon the exploitation of people and the planet, which widens inequalities and escalates poverty for those already at the margins, rendering people uncared for, voiceless, and invisibilized. It is in this context of interrelated challenges, converging crises, and alarming regression that we meet with a deep sense of urgency. Humanity is at a crucial turning point and we must act decisively.
Nos hemos reunido con una visión compartida de justicia de género, social, económica y ambiental para todos y todas, en todas partes, ahora y en el futuro. El único camino que hay por delante es hacia la inclusión, la equidad y la justicia, y un orden económico social sostenible basado en el cuidado, en un sendero que debe afirmar nuestra humanidad interdependiente y nuestros derechos humanos universales para todos y todas en todas partes. Reconocemos nuestras propias responsabilidades individuales y colectivas en este camino que tenemos por delante para con las personas, el planeta y las futuras generaciones.
duhurijwe hamwe munsi y'ibendera ridasanzwe ryitwa ubuntu, ndi kuko uri, twizeye ubumwe rusange bw'ubufatanye no guhuza abantu bose n'isi yose, ndetse n'icyifuzo cyo kubaka amatsinda ahuriye hamwe ngo atugeze ahazaza heza. Ijambo ubuntu rikunze gukoreshwa nk'imitekerereze igaragaza imyizerere ku gusangira ubumwe rusange buhuza abantu bose. Ubu buhanga turabwubaha kandi dushaka kubwubakiraho, tuzirikana cyane inkomoko yabwo, imizi, imigenzo n'ibitekerezo nyobozi bikomoka ku mugabane wa Afurika. Duha agaciro ubudasa buri hagati yacu kandi tukishimira ubukire bw'uturere dutandukanye, amateka n'imiterere y'aho dukomoka. Tuzirikana kandi twubakira ku mbaraga z'ubudasa nyamara ziduhuje z'ibitekerezo, kandi tukubaha urwunge rw'ibyo twemera n'ibituranga.
How we do what we do. We have come together with the commitment to center intersectional feminist systems change, accountability towards one another, decolonizing of our minds and practices, and to act in solidarity to transform patriarchal masculinities and unequal forms of power through movement building and gender transformative work with men and boys. We believe that we must name and call out the power abuses and violent practices that have driven the world to this situation. We acknowledge and build on the work of feminist women's rights defenders who articulated gender and patriarchy in connection with systems of oppression, build on the work of LGBTIQA+ rights activists who fought for inclusion and dignity in our journey for equal rights, and we built on the work of the racial, social justice, and environmental movements who paved the way before us. We accept the responsibility to join the broader call for systems change by intersectional feminist and social justice movements. We are grateful for the leadership and generosity with which feminists, women's rights, youth, LGBTIQA+ rights, and environmental and social justice activists and organizations contributed to the discussions throughout the journey of the Ubuntu Symposium. And we commit to continue learning from their critical analysis in the work with men and boys.
نعيد تأكيد التزاماتنا التي قطعناها على أنفسنا في الندوات العالمية السابقة التابعة لشبكة إشراك الرجال التي أقيمت في ريو في العام 2009 ودلهي في العام 2014، وكذلك ندوات إشراك الرجال أو Men Engage الإقليمية في العام 2008 إلى العام 2018 في أفريقيا، وندوات الرجوليات 2017-2019 في أمريكا اللاتينية. وضع إعلان ودعوة دلهي معياراً للأعضاء والشركاء والمجال الأوسع باتباع القيادة طويلة الأمد للحركات النسوية لتحديد النظام الأبوي كجزء من جذر تحليل المشكلة، والتأكيد على تحويل الرجوليات جزء من العمل من أجل تفكيك النظام الأبوي. Since Delhi, we have sought to expand nuance, deepen, and strengthen our collective political work to transform patriarchal masculinity. We're committed to the principles expressed in our previous agreement, as well to those we now share in the declaration. Commitments and calls to action. As an outcome of the Ubuntu Symposium, we affirm the following commitments and call to actions for NGOs, international NGOs, research institutions, networks, campaigns, UN agencies, governments, donors, multilateral agencies, private sector, media, the Men Engage Alliance members and others, institutions and individuals who are involved or planning to be involved in this work. We acknowledge that learning and commitment are needed in order to ensure that all our efforts and actions are advanced through the comprehensive approaches and lenses outlined below, which form the central pillars for the work we do.
Intersectional feminist approaches. We commit to firmly root our work with men and boys to transform patriarchal masculinities and intersectional feminist principles and analysis. We seek to adopt approaches that take learning from historical and contemporary feminist and social justice struggles to dismantle patriarchy and its intersecting systems of oppression, including, but not limited to, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, racism, colonialism, adultism, ableism, xenophobia, classism, casteism, and capitalism. We commit to following the leadership of feminist women's rights and intersectional social justice movements across our programs, advocacy, research, collective organizing, and movement building. Critical to this task is centering and elevating the agency, voices, analysis, and demands of women, LGBTQIA individuals, people of color, Black, Indigenous, and youth communities, centering those living at these intersections and who are on the margins of the margins. We commit to unpacking how systems of oppressions are gendered and how they create hierarchies that devalue the experience of women, girls, and gender non-conforming people from spheres of power and decision-making while elevating those of men and masculinities.
Feminist system change. We commit to gender transformative work with men and boys that learns from, is informed by, and builds upon intersectional feminist analysis and practice. We commit to working to dismantle unequal power structures and patriarchal systems to advance the feminist systems change agenda towards social, economic, and environmental justice, given the interwoven nature of global patriarchal exploitation with other systems of oppression. We commit to critical reflection about patriarchal masculinities in our work with men and boys, including institutional and ideological levels, as well as efforts to change individual man's behavior and attitudes. We acknowledge the importance of working to transform harmful attitudes and behavior at individual and group level. But we know working at micro level is not enough, and we commit to support the feminist system change agenda towards social, economic, and environmental justice, and to bring men and boys on board as advocates for systemic transformation.
Accountability. We commit to accountability and taking responsibility as the only way forward. We will uphold accountable practices that are responsive to the intersectional feminist social change agenda. We will transparently address potential harm, conflict of interest, and unintended effects of all our interventions, organizing and fundraising. We commit to holding ourselves accountable to the principles and standards that we have developed for the work on transforming masculinities and engaging men and boys in gender equality, including developing and strengthening our own capacities and practices. We commit to stay alert to inequalities around us and to acting accountably so that whenever we have the opportunity to access a platform, a microphone, or a seat at the table, we shall check whether and why countless groups are excluded from such opportunities and explicitly voice concern for these inequalities and exclusions. Whenever some individuals or groups are silenced or made invisible, when we are granted voice and privilege, we shall make all efforts to center them by either stepping back ourselves or sharing the space if that strengthens their position. In that light, we commit to the principle, nothing about us without us, and seek to be held accountable for this principle in our work moving forward as a collective, including young leaders. Commit to valuing the agency, perspectives, and leadership of young movements and young people in all our diversities, to centering young voices in our decision-making and agenda setting, and mutually sharing knowledge, resources, and opportunities to support and advance meaningful youth participation. We commit to working intergenerationally building on the histories and expertise across the movements, creating space for meaningful participation of youth, fostering intergenerational dialogue, peer-to-peer spaces of support, and mentoring. We commit to meaningful youth participation in programs and policies that seek to transform patriarchal masculinities as contributors, decision makers, and stakeholders.
Decolonización. Nos comprometemos a cuestionar, analizar y comunicar claramente cómo las estructuras de poder y dominación hegemónicas, coloniales, eurocéntricas y centradas en el norte continúan produciendo desigualdades en todo el mundo. Reconocemos que el ámbito del trabajo transformador de género con hombres y niños, incluyendo la recaudación de fondos para este trabajo, no queda exento a estas dinámicas y nos comprometemos a dirigir nuestros esfuerzos a desmantelar tales prácticas y sistemas. Nos comprometemos a desafiar las estructuras y manifestaciones de poder y control inequitativas que perpetúan los privilegios por encima de los derechos universales en nuestro propio pensamiento, forma de organización y acciones, y a trabajar hacia la decolonización de nuestra mente, nuestras prácticas y nuestras formas de organización, incluyendo la manera cómo se produce y se comparte el conocimiento.
Inner work for social change. We commit to an ongoing reflective practice that increases transformative awareness of self and others, as well as of the systems from which complex social problems arise. We acknowledge that all our commitments made here may not be possible unless we do the inner work required to propel social change. We believe that personal transformation is deeply interwoven to social change, and we call for reflecting on power and privilege, as well as where we are positioned within the system of oppression. This is particularly pertinent in the work with men and boys, who are historically privileged by patriarchy. We commit to continuous self-reflection and related change processes to become the change we want to see in the world.
Our with allyship and movement building. We commit to support and act in solidarity as meaningful allies to intersectional feminist and social justice movements and organizing, both on the streets and the halls of power. We seek to do so by radically listening and learning from these movements and from the lessons that they have learned over time, from their leadership, and to reach out, build bridges, and work in allyship. We commit to centering and elevating the knowledge and thought leadership arising from feminist movements, efforts to work as diverse collectives towards shared vision, and the contribution of global South feminists and leaders in capturing these lessons learned on how power can be held horizontally and collectively. We commit to engaging with people and groups who are privileged and benefit from the way power is currently distributed to transform all forms of oppressive power and dominance. We commit to deep self-reflection and to creating opportunities to collectively unpack the way power is held and maintained within our own organizing. We commit to creating spaces to continue to engage in strengthening partnerships, networks, and alliances as a political act and social change strategy, centering movement building and power width in all our work towards challenging and transforming the status quo.
Thank you so very much for not only taking us into the making of the declaration, because I think it enhances its magnitude and what a special document it is, but also the call to action as well. Because as we close today, there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think that the Ubuntu Declaration and call to action can be seen as a map that guides us on the road ahead, but also a map that connects us to our partners and communities all over the world, going back to what was said earlier, that we are not alone. And I think it does answer a question around accountability as well. So that's what this declaration is all about, laying out a set of common themes, common directions, aspirations, and commitments laying out ways in which we can be held accountable in a joint effort towards the realization of gender, social, economic, and environmental justice. Congratulations to its authors, its editors, the diverse voices that addressed us today as they went through its nuances and its intentions as well. So we congratulate you on a job well done, and thank you so very much for talking to us. I still can't get over the fact that it had so many participants and touched different corners of the world, if not all regions of the world. 72 participants, 6 regions, 51 countries. It really is a sight to behold. It really is something of which you must be absolutely, absolutely proud as the contributors and the editorial team. We congratulate you here.